The rain had barely stopped when Ronald stood outside the old stone chapel, watching strangers offer polished condolences they never truly meant. Inside, the only person who had ever believed in him had just been laid to rest. While others mourned with practiced expressions, he mourned the silence that would follow, knowing no one else would ever call him family again. Hours later, the relatives gathered inside the estate's grand library, where crystal chandeliers reflected across polished mahogany tables. Lawyers read through the will as expensive paintings, antique furniture, and investment portfolios were claimed with eager smiles. Every valuable possession found a grateful owner, every name except Ronal's. Whispers became laughter when his turn finally arrived. The last item, the attorney announced carefully, is assigned to Ronal. One elegant woman smirked before the velvet box was even opened. Probably another charity case. The lid lifted to reveal an old silver pocket watch, scratched beyond recognition, its cracked glass hiding frozen hands that hadn't moved in decades. Someone burst into laughter. "That's it?" Another shook his head. He always did pity the boy. The room filled with amused chuckles as the watch was carelessly slid across the table. It stopped against Ronal's trembling hand like something no one else wanted to touch. "It doesn't even work," one cousin mocked. "Maybe you'll get a few dollars for the metal." Heat rose behind Ronal's eyes, but he refused to answer. He simply picked up the worn watch, closed his fingers around its cold surface, and thanked the attorney with quiet dignity. Without another word, he walked through the towering front doors and into the fading evening. Behind him, laughter echoed through the mansion. Ahead stretched an uncertain future with empty pockets, a broken heart, and what everyone believed was a worthless keepsake. None of them realized they had just thrown away the key to a fortune hidden for generations. The weeks that followed blurred into a relentless cycle of disappointment. Ronald searched for work every morning before sunrise, carrying the same worn folder of applications from one business to the next. Most employers barely looked at him before offering polite excuses. The few interviews he managed ended with promises that never became phone calls. Savings disappeared faster than hope, and unpaid bills accumulated across his kitchen table like silent reminders that life had no intention of becoming easier. When the eviction notice finally arrived, he stared at the paper for several minutes before folding it with trembling hands. There was no anger left inside him, only exhaustion. By sunset, everything he still owned fit into two weathered suitcases and a faded backpack. The old pocket watch rested quietly in his coat pocket, heavier than its size should have allowed. Desperation eventually led him into pawn shops scattered across the city. One owner barely examined the watch before shrugging. Another laughed, calling it an outdated trinket with no collector's value. A third offered nothing at all, sliding it back across the counter with complete indifference. Each rejection echoed the humiliation he had already endured inside the mansion. Walking through cold streets one evening, Ronal remembered something his grandfather had once done. As a child, he had reached for the watch out of curiosity, but the old man gently closed his tiny fingers around it instead. "Never let anyone convince you this belongs in someone else's hands," he had whispered with unusual seriousness. Another memory surfaced days later inside a crowded bus station. His grandfather had been staring at the watch, smiling faintly before saying, "Some treasures only reveal themselves to those who refuse to give up." At the time, Ronald believed those words were nothing more than sentimental advice. Now, with nowhere left to go and nothing left to lose, those forgotten moments returned with unexpected clarity, leaving him unable to shake the growing feeling that the broken watch had never been ordinary at all. Rain tapped steadily against the small window of the budget motel where Ronal had rented a room for the night. The faded wallpaper peeled at the corners, and the scent of damp carpet filled the air. Unable to sleep, he emptied his pockets onto the tiny wooden table. A few coins, a crumpled receipt, and the old pocket watch lay beneath the weak yellow light. He picked it up again, turning it over in his hands. The scratches across its silver surface seemed deeper than he remembered, each one carrying years of forgotten history. Taking a soft cloth from his backpack, he carefully wiped away layers of dirt that had settled into the intricate engravings. As he pressed against the edge of the casing to remove a stubborn patch of grime, a sharp click broke the silence. Ronal froze. A narrow seam appeared along the side of the watch where no opening should have existed. Before he could react, a tiny folded strip of polished metal slowly emerged from the hidden compartment. His pulse quickened as he unfolded it with trembling fingers. Etched into its surface were strange symbols, unlike anything he had ever seen. Beneath them were a precise set of coordinates, followed by an elegant family crest, identical to the faded emblem he vaguely remembered carved above the fireplace in his grandfather's study. He stared at the impossible discovery, struggling to understand how such a compartment could have remained hidden for decades. The watch had never been broken. Its frozen hands had disguised something far more important. Suddenly, every memory of his grandfather protecting the watch returned with startling clarity. The warnings, the quiet smiles, the refusal to let anyone else hold it. They were never acts of sentiment. They were acts of protection. Ronald looked toward the rain-covered window, his reflection staring back with a mixture of fear and wonder. His grandfather hadn't left him a worthless keepsake. He had left him the first piece of a mystery that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal. The following morning, Ronald carefully copied the coordinates, unfamiliar symbols, and the faded family crest into a small leather notebook before heading toward the city's oldest public library. The massive stone building stood like a forgotten monument to history, its worn marble steps polished by generations of visitors. Inside, silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant turning of pages and the soft hum of aging lights. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight stretching between towering bookshelves, each shelf guarding stories that time had nearly erased. If the pocket watch truly concealed a secret, Ronald believed the answers had survived somewhere within these forgotten walls. He spent hours moving through brittle newspapers preserved on aging microfilm reels, patiently scanning article after article until his eyes began to ache. Most stories had nothing to do with his family, but just as exhaustion tempted him to quit, a yellowed headline from nearly 50 years earlier caught his attention. Prominent family divided over missing fortune. His heartbeat quickened. The article described a bitter legal dispute involving enormous missing assets that would be worth millions today. One side of the family publicly accused another of manipulating financial records and hiding substantial wealth before court proceedings could begin. Yet, when Ronal searched for the following editions, the coverage vanished completely. It was as though the investigation had never happened. No conclusion, no verdict, no explanation. The story simply disappeared from history. His curiosity deepened into quiet determination. The librarian directed him to the county records office across town, where forgotten property documents rested inside cracked filing cabinets that hadn't been opened for years. Ronal compared old maps with current records and immediately noticed something impossible. Several estates, farmland parcels, and historic buildings once owned by his family no longer existed on any modern registry. They hadn't been sold in the traditional sense. Instead, ownership had shifted through a series of unusually rapid legal transfers completed within days of one another decades earlier. An elderly archivist watched Ronald studying the records with growing concern before slowly approaching his desk. "I remember people asking about these files years ago," the old man said quietly. Then one day, entire folders simply disappeared. We were told the documents had been misplaced, but everyone here knew better. "Were they ever recovered?" Ronal asked. The archivist shook his head. History doesn't usually erase itself. Those words lingered in Ronald's mind long after the conversation ended. Determined to keep digging, he returned to the newspaper archives and searched for the names mentioned in the original article. What he uncovered was even more disturbing. One complete branch of his family had accused influential relatives of stealing an enormous inheritance before suddenly vanishing from public records. Birth certificates stopped appearing. Marriage licenses ended without explanation. Property ownership disappeared. Even photographs from charity events and newspaper features showed obvious signs of alteration, with certain faces carefully removed or cropped away. The pattern was no longer a coincidence. Someone hadn't merely hidden a fortune. They had erased every person who could prove where it truly belonged. As evening settled beyond the library windows, Ronal spread every copied article, map, and handwritten note across a long oak table. Piece by piece, a picture emerged of a conspiracy that had stretched across generations, protected by money, influence, and carefully manufactured silence. His grandfather had never been preserving old memories or clinging to sentimental family history. He had been safeguarding the truth from people powerful enough to rewrite history itself. And if they had gone to such extraordinary lengths to bury the past, they would almost certainly do anything necessary to keep Ronal from uncovering what came next. The coordinates engraved inside the pocket watch led Ronal to an abandoned train station on the outskirts of the city, where rusted tracks disappeared beneath thick weeds and silence had replaced the roar of passing locomotives decades ago. Most people drove past without noticing the crumbling platform, but standing there, Ronald felt as though someone had been waiting for him all along. Tucked beneath a loose wooden bench, exactly where the coordinates indicated, he discovered a small brass token stamped with the same family crest hidden inside the watch. On its reverse side was a locker number and the name of a railway company that no longer existed. The trail continued. After days of searching through historical records, Ronal learned that the company had transferred its remaining assets to an old downtown bank before closing forever. The building had since changed ownership several times, yet deep within its neglected archives, one forgotten safe deposit record still matched the locker number engraved on the token. Inside the aging deposit box rested a leather envelope sealed with dark red wax. It contained another handwritten clue from his grandfather, a faded map, and a tarnished iron key wrapped carefully inside yellowing cloth. One sentence stood alone beneath the map. Only the one who values truth above wealth deserves what waits beyond this door. The map guided Ronald toward a neglected countryside estate, hidden behind dense forests and winding gravel roads. According to every official document he had studied, the property had been demolished more than 40 years earlier. Yet, as the evening fog lifted, the outline of an aging manor slowly emerged beyond overgrown gates, untouched by time and absent from every modern record. Ronald gripped the old key tightly as a chill ran through him. His grandfather had never hidden a fortune in one place. He had created a carefully layered trail, each clue testing patience, integrity, and determination before revealing the next. With every step forward, the mystery grew deeper, the hidden fortune seemed more real, and the danger of someone else finding the trail increased. The rusted iron key slid into an equally weathered lock hidden behind a loose stone inside the manor's neglected study. With a reluctant groan, a concealed wooden cabinet swung open, releasing the stale scent of aged paper and cedar that had remained trapped for decades. Inside, neatly arranged and untouched by time, rested a collection of leather-bound journals bearing his grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. Ronal carefully opened the first journal, his hands trembling with anticipation. The opening pages shattered everything he believed about his family's past. His grandfather had never lost the family's fortune. He had hidden it. Page after page described a conspiracy orchestrated by relatives he had trusted most. Driven by greed, they secretly forged ownership documents, manipulated wills, bribed officials, and fabricated legal records to seize control of the family's expanding business empire. When his grandfather uncovered the scheme, he realized exposing them would place innocent family members in immediate danger. Instead of allowing the fortune to fall permanently into dishonest hands, he quietly moved every legitimate asset beyond their reach. Property deeds, financial certificates, precious reserves, and records proving true ownership were carefully concealed through a network of hidden locations known only to him. One journal entry, written in hurried ink, revealed the greatest heartbreak of all. They will call me a thief to hide their own crimes. History will remember their lies unless someone one day uncovers the truth. Ronald paused, unable to continue for several moments. Every insult, every laugh, every cruel dismissal he had endured suddenly carried a deeper meaning. His grandfather had sacrificed his own reputation to protect a legacy that could not be stolen. The final journal rested beneath the others, wrapped in faded cloth. Inside was a single sentence written with remarkable precision. "The watch is not an inheritance. It is the final safeguard against betrayal. Only when every piece is found should the truth be revealed." As Ronal slowly closed the journal, footsteps echoed faintly somewhere beyond the manor walls. Someone else had found the estate, and they were getting closer. Ronald extinguished the lantern and stood perfectly still as the footsteps outside the manor grew louder. Through a narrow crack in the weathered curtains, he spotted two black SUVs rolling through the overgrown entrance, their headlights cutting through the evening fog. Several well-dressed men stepped out, scanning the property with practiced precision. They weren't curious explorers. They knew exactly what they were looking for. He slipped the journals into his backpack and escaped through a concealed passage, described in his grandfather's notes, just moments before voices echoed through the study he had abandoned. By sunrise, the pursuit had spread beyond the forgotten estate. Ronald discovered his motel room had been searched, his phone was receiving anonymous threats, and a court notice falsely challenged his right to possess the watch, claiming it had been stolen family property. The people behind the decades-old conspiracy were no longer hiding in the shadows. They had realized someone was unraveling the lies they had spent generations protecting. Every move Ronal made was watched. A silver sedan appeared wherever he traveled. Unknown investigators questioned librarians, bank employees, and even the elderly archivist who had quietly helped him. Friends warned him that strangers were asking for his location, offering generous rewards for information. It became painfully clear that wealth had purchased loyalty, silence, and influence for decades. Yet the watch still held one final secret. Studying its intricate gears beneath a magnifying glass, Ronal noticed tiny engraved markings invisible to the naked eye. As he carefully aligned the frozen hands according to the symbols hidden inside the journals, another concealed mechanism clicked into place. A wafer-thin disc emerged, revealing a final set of directions and a date circled in faded ink. Everything pointed toward one destination. Whoever arrived there first would control the truth forever. As Ronal folded the fragile disc into his pocket, engines roared outside. The black SUVs had found him again. There was no time left to hide. The final race had begun. The final coordinates led Ronald back to the abandoned estate just before dawn. A cold mist drifted across the overgrown grounds, wrapping the crumbling manor in silence. Every instinct told him he was running out of time. The black SUVs were somewhere behind him, closing the distance with every passing minute. Inside the forgotten study, he placed the pocket watch into a circular indentation carved beneath the old fireplace, exactly as the final journal described. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then a deep metallic click echoed beneath the floor. The ancient stone hearth slowly shifted aside, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Carrying a lantern, Ronal stepped carefully below, each footstep stirring decades of untouched dust. At the bottom waited a massive steel vault door, engraved with the same family crest that had guided him from the very beginning. The watch fit perfectly into the vault's central lock. With one final turn, the mechanism released. The heavy door swung inward. Rows of sealed wooden chests stretched across the underground chamber. Shelves overflowed with meticulously preserved ledgers, original property deeds, bearer bonds, gold reserves, rare coins, priceless historical collectibles, and legal documents protected inside waterproof cases. Every item had been catalogued in his grandfather's careful handwriting, creating an undeniable record of the family's true ownership. What had once been a fortune was now worth many millions. Tears filled Ronal's eyes as he realized the truth. His grandfather had never hidden wealth out of greed. He had hidden justice. The pocket watch had never been the inheritance everyone mocked. It had been the master key, protecting an entire legacy, until someone worthy possessed both the courage and integrity to uncover it. As Ronald opened the final leather folder, he found notarized affidavits, signed confessions, and original contracts exposing every forged will, every fraudulent transfer, and every stolen asset that had destroyed his family decades earlier. At that exact moment, voices echoed down the staircase above. The conspirators had finally arrived, but they were too late. For the first time in generations, the truth was no longer hidden. It belonged to Ronal. Within days, the contents of the underground vault were placed under official protection. Every journal, deed, financial ledger, notarized affidavit, and signed confession was carefully examined by investigators, who quickly realized they were looking at evidence that had remained hidden for nearly half a century. What had once seemed like an unbelievable family legend became an undeniable legal case built on original documents that no forged record could erase. Court hearings followed, drawing intense public attention. Reporters filled the galleries as decades of deception unraveled piece by piece. The forged wills were exposed, fraudulent property transfers were declared invalid. Hidden bank accounts, shell companies, and fabricated ownership records were traced back to the very relatives who had laughed when Ronald received the old pocket watch. Their carefully protected empire collapsed under the weight of the truth they had buried for generations. Properties were reclaimed. Stolen assets were returned to their rightful estate. Those responsible faced criminal charges, financial penalties, and the permanent loss of the wealth they had built upon betrayal. The family name they had manipulated to gain power became a symbol of greed and disgrace instead. Many expected Ronal to celebrate their downfall. Instead, he remained remarkably quiet. Standing outside the courthouse with the weathered pocket watch resting in his hand, he remembered his grandfather's final lesson. Justice and revenge had never been the same thing. Rather than chasing those who had wronged him, Ronal devoted his energy to restoring the honor that had been stolen from his grandfather. Every public statement he made focused on the truth, not resentment. Every decision reflected the values of the man who had sacrificed his own reputation to protect the future. In the end, the greatest contrast was not between wealth and poverty. It was between greed and integrity. The people who had spent their lives stealing everything ultimately lost it all. The man they had dismissed as worthless walked away with something far greater than millions. He carried his grandfather's name with honor once again. Months passed, and the abandoned estate that had once stood hidden beneath vines and silence slowly came back to life. The cracked stone walls were carefully restored, the neglected gardens bloomed again, and the empty halls echoed with the voices of families, students, and historians instead of whispers and betrayal. Rather than turning the property into a private mansion, Ronal honored his grandfather's vision by transforming it into a museum and community center where the true history of the family could finally be shared without fear or deception. Visitors traveled from across the country to see the remarkable collection recovered from the underground vault. The restored journals, original deeds, historic photographs, and treasured artifacts told a story far more valuable than the fortune itself. They spoke of courage, sacrifice, and a man who had willingly carried the burden of false accusations to protect what rightfully belonged to future generations. At the center of the main exhibit rested the old silver pocket watch. Its scratched surface remained untouched, its cracked glass preserved exactly as it had been on the day Ronal inherited it. A small plaque beneath the display read, "True worth is rarely recognized at first glance." Thousands paused before the humble watch, amazed that an object once dismissed as worthless had protected a legacy worth many millions. Ronald often stood quietly among the visitors, never announcing who he was. Watching children study the exhibit with wonder brought him a deeper sense of fulfillment than wealth ever could. His grandfather had been right. The greatest inheritance had never been money. It had been truth. As the museum prepared to close one peaceful evening, the setting sun cast a warm beam of light through the display case. For a brief instant, it illuminated a tiny engraving hidden inside the watch's inner rim, so small it had escaped every previous inspection. Ronald smiled faintly as he noticed the unfamiliar symbol. Perhaps his grandfather had left one final mystery behind. And somewhere beyond the restored estate, another remarkable journey was quietly waiting to begin.